barrel. Tupperware shares plunged today. Tupperware was down 49%, the largest drop on record to notch a record low after the company said it hired financial advisors to help improve its capital structure and remediate its doubts regarding its ability to continue as a going concern. Again, Tupperware today down by 48.76%. Recapping stocks end of the day mixed, with the S&P up 4 points, up 1/10. NASDAQ was down less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. A lot of things on our mind on this Monday, and that includes French President Emmanuel Macron urging Europe to develop more strategic autonomy as a way to avoid the risk of turning EU countries into vassals. That's his word, in the event of a global crisis such as a U.S.-China confrontation. And this is on the heels of President Macron's visit last week to China. So with the guidance on what this means, we are so delighted to have back with us Andy Brown, former editorial director at Bloomberg New Economy. Andy spent 3 decades in Asia as both China editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal. Today he leads the China Hub. He is a partner at Brunswick Group, a critical issues advisory firm. Andy, back with us via Zoom in New York City. Andy, thank you. Good to have you here with Maddie and myself. What's your read on President Macron's visit and then the comments post his visit to China?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, Carol and Maddie. The comments, as you say, really are quite extraordinary and have been interpreted as inflammatory, in fact, by China hawks in the U.S. I mean, the context, here he is, the French president, Emmanuel Macron, in China, saying that Europe should distance itself from the United States at a time when the United States is involved in intense strategic competition with China. Competition over Taiwan, over the South China Sea. They're at loggerheads over high technology, over human rights, over the situation in Ukraine. And Macron comes out and he says, no, we need strategic autonomy. We're not going to be followers. And the most explosive of his comments was, and we're not going to be dragged by the United States into a conflict over Taiwan. And this to politicians like Marco Rubio really is outrageous. So he's saying, okay, here we are, the United States defending Europe, sending aid, sending arms, military equipment to Ukraine, and you're saying, you're not going to support us in Taiwan.
Why now for this move from Macron?
He's always sought what he calls strategic autonomy, somewhere between the United States and China. This time he talked about creating a European third superpower. But business and economics plays very much into this scenario. Macron arrives in China with 50-odd business executives in tow, representing industries from fashion to nuclear, and they're all doing great deals. So he's making clear the difference between the United States and Europe on this. And in fact, that sense is quite broadly shared in Europe, that Europe doesn't want to go in for economic decoupling. Ursula von der Leyen, the European president of the European Commission, was quite clear on this point. She said, we want de-risking from China. We don't want decoupling. But certainly Macron sees commercial opportunity in China's reopening. And by the way, President Xi Jinping of China, this is all music to his ears. Relations with the United States are on ice, and here's Europe coming along with trade, offers of trade and technology. It's exactly what he needs at this point.
Well, and is it similar, Andy? I know we've talked about this a lot over the years. Is it the same for U.S. businesses? We just talked about Tesla building a large new battery factory in Shanghai. So further digging in deeper when it comes to China specifically, U.S. big companies, they're still going to be in China doing business, or no?
Yeah, well, in some ways, Elon Musk is quite exceptional. It's the rare U.S. CEO that's going out there now and announcing big business deals with China. In fact, we just had a big conference in Beijing called the China Development Forum, run by the Chinese government, the Chinese State Council. Far fewer U.S. corporate executives than usual were there. They were rather reluctant to turn up. They definitely didn't want to do any media, and they certainly didn't want to make any announcements of investments in China, which might expose them to criticism by this newly created House Committee on China, which plans to haul U.S. CEOs and other prominent figures with connections to China in front of the committee for televised hearings. They're very nervous about that. So yeah, this is advantage Europe versus the United States, certainly when it comes to corporate engagement.
It's so interesting because I also have to wonder whether when it comes to Xi Jinping, are these CEOs concerned about the lack of predictability there? We just got through years of COVID-0 in China. To what extent are people willing and ready to move on from that and say, well, this is an opportunity now, so let's fly over there with 50 CEOs in tow?
Yeah, well, Joe Biden is highly unlikely to replicate that kind of mission. In fact, the U.S. is working in the opposite direction. It wants economic containment of China, not economic engagement with China. Certainly in the area of high tech, that's what the Inflation Reduction Act is all about. That's what Chips and Science is all about. Billions of dollars to build supply chains in the United States, to bring jobs back from China to the United States, and to make the United States less reliant on China. So it's all working really in quite the opposite direction. But U.S. businesses in China are worried about two things. First of all, geopolitics, and particularly the situation in the Taiwan Strait and the possibility of a Chinese invasion. But they're also worried about domestic economic policy and whether the Chinese administration really has eased up on its extraordinary assaults on the private sector that we saw beginning in the middle of 2021 with the attack on the big tech digital platforms, Alibaba, Didi and the other tech giants.
Well, it just is always interesting, and I feel like so many different things coming at us from so many different angles. Andy, thank you. I know another busy day, so appreciate it. Andy Brown, partner at the Brunswick Group, joining us via Zoom in New York City. And while we're on the subject of China, specifically the strained relations between the U.S. and China, in today's Wall Street Week Daily segment, Bloomberg's David Weston spoke earlier with U.S. Treasury Undersecretary for International Affairs Jay Shambaugh, who noted that the U.S. is not seeking to decouple its economy from China.
We obviously need to be able to work together, and I think that's something you heard from the leaders when they had the summit in Bali, that they charged their teams to communicate and work together, and in particular work together on global challenges. So they said, the world expects us to be able to work together on some of these big challenges, whether it's climate or debt or things like that. So we'll have to be able to communicate with our Chinese counterparts and try to help move these processes along. And I think you've seen us doing that. So right after that leader summit in Bali, Secretary Yellen had an important bilateral with senior Chinese officials. Then in January, we met face-to-face with Liu He, the vice premier at the time. And we've had continued contacts at staff and at my level. And so we're really trying to make sure that we're working with the Chinese on these important issues. In terms of your specific question around decoupling, I think it's important for us to be clear. The U.S. is not seeking to decouple from China. We're not seeking to limit China's growth. Those aren't our strategic objectives. We, in some cases, have clear national security interests, and we will always defend those interests. And so sometimes that involves, specific restrictions around specific technologies, but we're not trying to massively decouple. We occasionally or frequently have issues with different economic policies in China, and we will always defend U.S. economic interests as well, but we're not in any way trying to separate these two economies entirely. That's just neither practical nor in our interest.
All right, that is the voice of U.S. Treasury Undersecretary for International Affairs, Jay Shambaugh, joining Bloomberg's David West. And check out the full interview. You can find it at Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg terminal. Be sure to catch this Friday, Bloomberg Wall Street Week with David Weston. That's at 6 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. Hey, coming up, a story I know both you and I have really wanted to get to.
the abortion rulings, right? This is so critical in both Texas and Washington state, completely different rulings on that. And we also have some breaking news from the Biden administration pushing against that Texas ruling. So really important to talk about today.
Yeah, and we're going to get into, the healthcare, the medical side of it, and what it means for healthcare of women across the country, and then the legal case, just trying to understand it so we can all be smart moving forward as we continue to talk about it. All right, first up, though, let's get back to world and national news. This is certainly playing out there. Back to Nancy Lyons we go. She's at our 99.1 newsroom in the nation's capital. Hey, Nan.
Thanks, Carol. Louisville police say the gunman who killed 4 people and injured 9 others this morning was an employee of the bank where the shooting took place. They say he live-streamed his attack. He is among the dead. Troy Haste was in the bank and witnessed it as it happened.
We have a break room. I got in there and shut the door for a second. And then I was looking around, I opened the door to see where he was at, and I could see him still shooting. I didn't see his face. And then I took off running out the front door.
Troy Hayes says the person next to him in the conference room was among those shot. President Biden is calling on lawmakers to take action on gun violence following today's shooting. Biden asked, quote, "When will Republicans in Congress act to protect our communities?" The Justice Department has opened a criminal investigation into the leak of highly classified Pentagon documents that revealed how the U.S. spies on other countries, including an assessment of weaknesses in Ukraine's military. National Security spokesman John Kirby.
We're going to get to the bottom of this, and then if there's actions that need to be taken, as we learn more about the extent of what happened here, we'll obviously take those.
John Kirby says it does appear some of the information posted online had been altered. The leaked documents include details on U.S. aid to Ukraine and Kyiv's military activities. The documents also indicate the U.S. has been spying on adversaries and allies. The Justice Department has also appealed a Texas judge's order halting abortion pill approval. The DOJ calls it extraordinary and unprecedented. Senator Richard Blumenthal is recovering from surgery after breaking his leg at a University of Connecticut victory parade. The lawmaker's spokesperson says it happened in Hartford Saturday when another parade goer tripped and fell on top of Blumenthal. The 77-year-old Democrat was saluting the UConn Husky men's basketball team for winning their 5th NCAA championship. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries.
This is Caroline Hyde.
And I'm Ed Ludlow. Join us for Bloomberg Technology, a daily podcast focusing exclusively on technology, innovation, and the future of business.
We bring you the latest headlines from tech top companies and conversations with the industry's biggest decision makers.
We will have to show our own productivity gain.
Privacy is a hugely important issue.
It's extraordinary what chip technology can achieve.
The Bloomberg Technology Podcast, every weekday.
Subscribe today on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at Bloomberg.com.
Interactive Brokers clients earn up to 4.33% on their uninvested, instantly available cash balances. That's just one of the many reasons clients use Interactive Brokers to trade stocks, options, futures, currencies, bonds, funds, and more. Rates subject to change. Visit ibkr.com/interest rates to learn more. That's ibkr.com/interest rates.
Join Bloomberg Live in Chicago on April 13th for Bloomberg's intelligent automation briefing about transformation in a time of uncertainty. During this special event, top business and IT executives will gather to explore ways in which intelligent automation can offset economic pressures and help organizations thrive by enhancing operational efficiencies and stakeholder value. This program is proudly sponsored by IBM. Register at BloombergLive.com/automation/radio.
Dear Calvary Hospital, my father, Curtis Moore, is my hero. Now 96 years old, he has led an exceptional life of self-sacrifice. A Moffett Point Marine, a New York City detective, and a family man who cared for his children and grandchildren his entire life. So when other hospitals could no longer relieve his suffering or our family's emotional pain, we brought in Calvary's miraculous team of home hospice experts. Thanks to Calvary's doctors, nurses, and social workers, Dad was able to resume the quality of life he wanted and deserved, surrounded by the love of his entire family. And I became more than just his caregiver. I was his daughter again. Thank you, Calvary. Phyllis Robinson.
This is Frank Calamari. With Calvary at Home, experience our unique Calvary care right in your own home. Call us today at 718-518-2465.
The New Deal created American infrastructure that unleashed new opportunity. Today, we're doing it again with massive investment in modernizing our infrastructure to build for tomorrow. At Build America Mutual, we protect your municipal bond investments that help make it happen, building a vibrant future for our communities and your portfolio. Invest in the future of America with BAM insured bonds.
Bloomberg Radio, on demand and in your podcast feed.
On the latest edition of the Sound On podcast, Mick Mulvaney, the former acting White House Chief of Staff, current chair at Actum Global Consultants, on increasing tensions between the U.S. and China. We were talking boy who cried wolf last week with these big responses that kind of lead to nothing. Is that what we're seeing here from China?
No, I think you're seeing, about what we expected, maybe a few days later than we expected, but they were not happy with McCarthy meeting with the president, just like they weren't happy with Pelosi doing it previously. So I don't think it surprises me. I'm sort of out of, in fact, I'm absolutely out of the inner circles right now, so I can't imagine it would surprise anybody else who has better information than I do.
Are you surprised, though, by how the U.S. policy around Taiwan seems to be shifting in some way? I mean, does the one China policy still stand as we continually are meeting with the Taiwanese leader?
Formally, it does. And keep in mind, I don't think there's any part of the one China policy that would prevent those sorts of meetings, right? At the same time, your question is the right one, Kaylee, which is the attitude changing? And it seems like it is. Keep in mind, we don't have a treaty with Taiwan. We don't have an agreement to defend them. Part of the reason, in fact, a major reason we don't have it, is we don't even recognize it as a country. So I think there's a lot of folks, especially, including folks in Washington, who think it's a country we recognize, but we don't. So is that changing? Probably. As Joe and I have talked about a lot on this program, the attitude towards China is changing across both parties. So it does not surprise me, for example, that Nancy went. It doesn't surprise me that Kevin went. It's what you would expect them to do in this environment.
Here's a full conversation on the latest edition of the Bloomberg Sound On podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Plus, listen anytime on the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com. Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com on Bloomberg Television.